I don't know, whatever. Anyway, about the book of Revelation, I think a few things that are interesting. I'm not sure why it's in the Bible, first of all. I'm not a theologian. This is not my specialty. I will say this. What is unique about early Christianity is that it was a historical religion. It was historical. If you read the the New Testament, you see that Jesus and his followers, they believed the end of times was coming soon. Apparently, this was a view shared by many Jewish sects at this time. I recently read about one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in the Middle East was the Dead Sea Scrolls. You've probably heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls. They were discovered in a cave near the Dead Sea in Israel, and or on the West Bank. And they were written by an apocalyptic society, basically, who felt that the end of times was near. And this is something I've always had trouble wrapping my head around, but I mean, and what I mean by that is I have a hard time appreciating it. Like, I don't know what it, I don't know what it's like living, knowing or believing that the end of times was coming soon, although we probably should with climate change. But in a way, I guess, strictly speaking, in theological terms, the book of Revelation fits in the Bible because of its historical bent, right? There is an end times that will come. And yeah, it'll be a time of salvation for some and punishment for others. M is right. It's a very curious book, on the other hand, though, Revelation, because it's full of all kinds of numerology and the importance of symbols that I do not understand. The image I remember is that Jesus comes riding on a white horse out of the Euphrates River, and the horse has a sword out of its mouth. But the book has also been used in something like the Rapture Index, which I think we did talk about in this class. And that's what Rebecca is referencing, the culture and among certain Christians that think that the book of Revelation offers us important predictions for the end of time. So, for example, one of the things that happens in the book of Revelation at the end of times is that there will be a great battle between the forces of good and evil in Iraq. Well, Babylon, which is modern day Iraq. And so during the Iraqi war a few years ago, a lot of people were saying this is the predictions of the book of Revelation are coming true, right? The Rapture Index, in a way, was ticking stuff off like, we're getting close to the rapture. The rapture, by the way, being when Jesus comes, and some of us will be in rapture and taken up to heaven, and others will not. Have I explained anything okay? Anything I'm leaving out? Questions, comments?
So the gospel is what the fellas were talking about. So when you see in the bio, it says like John 13, that's a gospel. Okay. Now I know. That's awesome.
Yep. And the gospels are not very related, which is the other curious thing. Like John, Matthew, so for example, the Christmas story about Jesus born in Bethlehem, they flee, whatever, they go to Nazareth, that whole story, that is only told, I believe, in Matthew and Mark, but not in John. John picks it up right in the middle of his life. And John is also the most gruesome description of his death. If you guys remember, a few years ago, Mel Gibson made a movie, The Passion of the Christ. which was really gory. I never saw it, but that was based on John. Yes, there we go, Rebecca. Thank you. But, again, anyway, this is all stuff, if you're interested, this would be all very fascinating stuff for further research. Why were certain gospels included? Why were certain gospels excluded? One of the gospels makes mention of Jesus's brother. Oh, I left out a huge part of the New Testament, the Acts of the Apostles, which is the story of the gospel of the apostles after Jesus dies and when they start to spread his teachings in the Eastern Mediterranean. And the leader of the church at that time is a man by the name of James. Now we know in retrospect, James, that was Jesus's brother. These documents get tinkered with, most notably the letters of Paul. They get tinkered with. They get tinkered with when Christianity becomes a state religion in the, Chris is objecting to that name. That's okay. James is not a bad name. I mean, to us it's boring, but at the time it was probably like, what's your name? Never heard of that before. Come on, got to go way back. Anyway, when Christianity is taken over and becomes a state religion of the Roman Empire, you realize it has to be modified significantly, right? This is one of the conversations we're having here with Eagleton, right? If you just look at the Gospel of Matthew, it is utterly incompatible with running an empire. It had to be transformed. It had to be morphed. One of the best books I've taught for anybody interested, it was Karen Armstrong is her name. She's a biblical scholar. She wrote a book about Paul just a few years ago, and she points out that Paul has a reputation for being very chauvinist. But he's also the guy I told you, he said, when you are baptized in Christ, you are no longer man or woman, Jew or Greek, master or slave. And how do you reconcile that with his apparent chauvinism? Well, she points out that scholars now realize that his chauvinism was added later because the Romans, they didn't want to have a change. They didn't want to change the status quo. And the gospel was just too challenging. In any case, there, I wanted to explain a few things about, right, Em? I'm telling you, I was hating on him too, but you got to read this book. It was really interesting. If we had had a different Paul bequeathed to us with a different, without those added sections, that would have been unbelievable. By the way, the book is written by Karen Armstrong. It's a very short book. It's only like 150 pages. Very eye-opening. I've gotten very interested in biblical study in the last few years, largely because you guys know my specialty is political philosophy. And so I'm always interested in how religion is adapted and adopted and tinkered with and used to advance certain causes. And so the political decisions that were involved in the making of the Bible, I think, are really fascinating. So I don't know anything about how the Jewish Bible was tinkered with. And that would be a fascinating, the Old Testament, that'd be a fascinating subject. For that matter, I don't know how the Quran was tinkered with. I don't have the faintest idea. When we get to Kwame Appiah towards the end of class, this course, we're going to be talking about certain passages in the Quran and how they contradict one another seemingly. But we will not be taking a much deeper dive. So the opportunity is there for you to take that deeper dive if you're interested. All right. Any questions or comments?
I was going to say, I just double checked. The Torah is mostly considered like the first 5 books of the entire Tanakh. So it's like
By the you keep using the word Tanakh, and I don't know what that means. Are you talking about the Pentateuch? Are you talking?
The Tanakh would basically be the like Hebrew Bible.
So when you say the first 5 books, are we talking about Genesis, Exodus?
It says it can also mean, yeah, that's what it looks like. Well, yeah, the books that they're referring to are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers.
Okay, that's the Pentateuch.
Okay.
And you guys know Penta in Greek means 5. It's the first 5 books of the Bible. So the Torah is the commentary on the first 5 books.
Yes.
Good. Thank you. Anything else? Anybody have any questions? I can't promise I can answer them. Anybody have any questions about any of this stuff? All right. There. Now let's do our 180-degree turn the other way and talk about sex.
Woo!
Woo! My question is pretty basic. Here you go. I mean, I want to take this opportunity. I'm going to post it. No, Tobias. No, it's not happening. I won't even talk about it with my own children. I can't. Nope, can't do it. Public school is going to have to take care of that shit for me. Let's talk about, I don't care how stunted they are. We'll survive. I'm going to post something here. I'm putting a question in the chat that I want you all to think on. Okay. And I want you all to write an answer and then you can post it. Okay. Here we go. Why do religions get so focused on sexual mores? Why do they feel the need to weigh in on sex and marriage, sex relations and marriage, as opposed to social justice, sometimes to the exclusion of it? Okay. Wait, I want people to write. I want you to think on this. I'll call on you in a second, but let's take a minute of silent meditation and write an answer. Not in that way, Natan. Think about it intellectually. This is not fantasy time. And then when you've come up with an answer, put it in the chat, and then of course we'll see what you all want to say too. But I'd love everybody. I want to hear from everybody. That means Freya and Noah and Gia. Everybody, I want to hear from everybody. Christina, Kennedy. That might be an interesting related point or starting off point, Brittany, about love. Okay, so thank you. M has something big here. Finn, good. Nice answer, M. Yeah. I hope I have other answers coming. Come on, put them in the chat, please. There we go, Sunny. Thank you. And Tobias, excellent. Okay, while people are working on that, why don't Rebecca go ahead, and if you want to comment.
Yeah, so I have a lot of thoughts about this, especially thinking about my upbringing. But to me, it seems like a lot of people focus on this one because I think a lot of the people who are obsessed with like sexual morality or immorality or whatever are already in positions of power. And so they kind of want to preserve that power. And they also want to distract you from issues of social justice because if you're thinking about that, then you'll realize that like a lot of this doesn't matter. And I think there's also like a lot of misconceptions about what the Bible means when it talks about adultery and sexual immorality. So they kind of intentionally misinterpret it to mean like that there needs to be all these rules and regulations around it. A lot of like, you know, the opposition to gay people is like what some people were saying in the chat, which is like, well, you know, sex is about procreation. We have to like continue the human race. That's what God told Abraham to do. We have to do that. And so they end up with like this really warped idea of what it's even for. And also, I think a lot of men have really taken that term as far as possible to basically like shame women out of autonomy in any way, shape, or form. And they kind of weaponize sex as like this thing that they can use to control people, especially women. But I have been reading up too. I'm like, you know, obviously this ideology is still really damaging to men also. It's just men that are also perpetuating it.
Very nice. Thank you. Natan.
For, like with my upbringing, I think of how or why religion is so like focused on sex. It's more about for me. It's like well, there's many things. Like my first like more things like oh you shouldn't you can have sex after marriage because sex isn't like shouldn't be important. You should be looking at someone's soul or something like that.
Mm.
And then the other part is in the Jewish teachings, we are taught that the human body, especially the female body, is very like I won't say pure and like holy. Like after marriage, they have to like cover their hair, and after they all these rules about sex, really, pretty much about like procreate. Like again, one example is when a woman goes to has a period, you can't touch her for 2 weeks because she's unpure.
Right.
So probably something like that. Like it's like this purity thingy thing. So sex is like not that because yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Finn.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I just think it's all a power trip. I think that it all can, when you talk about problems like this, it really all can boil down to like like a handful of like key issues. And one of them I do think is like a power imbalance and maintaining a hierarchy, maintaining an order. And I also think that like what Natan was saying with like Jewish perspectives on that. I remember my mom used to fight with my dad a lot because he was my dad was really getting into conservatism, and she was kind of like, why, like, you know, she was kind of like, I don't really like how they treat women. And there was this whole conversation where basically they all just talk about how it's an honor like to cover your hair. It's an honor to like not go outside sometimes. It's an honor to like have these things, but it's just like I don't know. It's such a complicated issue, but I do think it all boils down to the control that a lot of men seek. And I do think it's, even though women definitely perpetuate it, I do think it is very centered around like the male ego and the male identity, like as like specifically like in Christian America, those kind of guys.
Thank you. I can't help thinking about the shooter in Atlanta. Did you guys read about what was motivating him? I mean, his attacks inspired a lot of the anti-Asian hate protests over the weekend, but in the last week. But it seems that he was clearly, which may have played a role for him, but it was clearly his own words were that he was disgusted with his own sexual weakness and was really adhering to a form of religiosity that really condemned that, really put him on guard against sexual weakness. There was a very interesting piece in the New York Times a few days ago, talking about this and about what many of you are commenting here about is like, unfortunately, there is a great gender imbalance in this form of religiosity, at least the way the author was talking about it, right? That women are temptresses and they need to dress accordingly so they don't tempt. And, and they play a role in men's weakness. It's a kind of religiosity that, I haven't heard much about in so long, but it seems to be really, at least in the life of this man, it really sparked him, in a chilling way. I'm just looking at, hey, Zach, you have your hand up. Go for it.
Yeah. So I think that there's based on what everyone's saying, that there's probably a multitude of reasons that religion focuses so much on sex. So I think that a big part of it is the power dynamic thing that we're talking about, that religion is in the hands of in the hands of the powerful, in a lot of cases men, is just kind of being exploited to extend their power over others' autonomy, specifically in this sense bodily autonomy. And then we also, something that Chris mentioned in the chat is that if religion can have control over such a private part of your life, then it can have control over the non-private parts too. If it's able to exert control in such a powerful way over such an intimate, private thing, then it can exert that same power over the other parts of your life that are less intimate, less private. And then, also, I think an important part is that sex mirrors, the act of procreation rather mirrors the act of God's creation for religious people. So it's in that way, since you are creating creating life in the same way that God created life, supposedly. I think that is a justification for a lot of people to say that sex is sacred, or that procreation is sacred.
Good.
And then also, if I could add on to this, just also the fact that it's almost because it's sacred and it's a sensory thing, to not treat it as sacred and to do it for fun or something is seen as sinful then, and that's lust, and that it's a perversion of God's procreation in a way.
Yeah, that was good. Thank you. Related, another question. How should religion weigh in on sex? Does it rightfully have something to add? Zach, you're back at it.
Oh, is my hand still up? I think that was an accident.
Oh, okay. Then Rebecca.
So this one's kind of tricky just because my experience with religion weighing in on sex has not been great. And I definitely don't think that religion should have any involvement in policy. They don't have any business telling people personally what to do, with their own personal lives.
Mhm.
But I do think that there are some interpretations of what Christianity says about sex that are good. A lot of the people who I've heard talk about it that are more I guess you would say progressive Christians, talk about how in their interpretation, sexual immorality would basically mean using people to your advantage, or using sex as a way to get what you want.
Mm.
And that could obviously be very damaging to people, and it's harmful to other people emotionally. So if the Christian doctrine is teaching you to just have sex in a way that's responsible, I feel like that could be a good addition to the conversation. But if you're just saying what I've heard, which is don't do it until you're married, even once you do it, it has to be this certain way, you know, like there's a lot of really yucky stuff that people say about women in marriage, which is like, you owe your husband sex, you should be able to give it to him whenever he asks. Like consent is not a thing for a lot of them. And in that case, it's like that is not going to help anybody. And like it seriously does damage the minds of men too, like the rules they have about like can't masturbate, like you can't do all these things. Like that restriction is not, I think we've seen that it's just not good. But I think that there are some things that, you know, like some Christian doctrine says that could be useful to people in like, you know, moving through the world, living their lives. But again, none of that should be legislated whatsoever.
Yeah, I was thinking more in terms of like, is this how is this how is sex a domain of life where it makes sense for religion to weigh in? You know, why, is it a central part of our life? Are there certain moral considerations about sex that, makes it justified for religion to weigh in? Sorry if I'm having a hard time putting it, but I was thinking about the comments from Zach. He was using the word sacred in relation to sex. So maybe if I put it this way, is it proper or good to teach that sex is sacred? I bet you never thought you'd get asked that question in a class at Micah, huh? Cheers. You're welcome. There's wine in here. I'm just kidding. Finn.
I was gonna say, I think from a non-religious perspective, I don't think sex should be sacred-defied because of
Sacrified.
Yeah, whatever. Just because I think that does have a lot of nasty implications. Like I think that making it just more honest, like what Rebecca was saying, with just like how to do things responsibly. You can have like being like, it's an action with weight, especially now in like the society we live in. It's an action that can have a lot of like effects. So it's like you need to do it carefully and you need to do it safely, but it shouldn't be something shrouded in like, like mystery or shrouded in like conspiracy or like put on a pedestal, because it's like, if you want to talk about like animal nature, you're supposed to poop and make babies. That's all we do. So I think that I just think that it's so taboo, and that's what really got me, because I also grew up in a conservative space. There were we were taught abstinence in my school.
Yeah. And
that is just so backwards to me. Even then I was like, what happens if people still have sex anyway? Like, what are we supposed to do then? Like, like, are you just throwing us to the dogs right now? So that's what it kind of feels like. So yeah, I think that sex should not be sacred, but in the context of like religious purposes, I think it should be respected.
Good.
I don't think it's got a lot of respect right now.
Good. Thank you. Chris.
Oh, yeah, I think Finn and Rebecca summed up what I wanted to say, but I do also think it's kind of like a weird fine line, because like, as a queer person, or also, like when I'm talking with like some friends who are like women of color or like trans people of color, and we've been told for a long time that, like our sexual relations are bad and they're blasphemy, we're going to go to hell. And so it's like them to like sort of take that notion of sex is sacred and say, well, like queer sex is sacred, or like, a woman's sexuality is sacred. I do think that's like an interesting take on it. But overall, I think just like a dog, like going to do stuff with another dog is not thinking, wow, this is some higher calling. I think it really does put sex on like this weird thing, as opposed to like the actual thing where it's like, two people getting it on. There's nothing special about that most of the time.
Oh my God. Okay, Chris. Although you did say a second ago that there's something sacred about queer sex, you thought there was something interesting in that idea.
No, I think it's more like the way that like queer groups have like taken that sort of like, like only, cis heteronormative sex is sacred, and like taken it, say, no, we're sacred. not like the overall argument of sex is sacred is something that I don't agree with, but I do think that sort of like reappropriation of it is a interesting thing.
Good. Okay, I got you now. I got
I think queer sex is sacred, but alike to dog sex, straight sex is not sacred. That's the new opinion I'm taking on right now.
Okay. I'm going to put something in the chat here. It was an earlier comment that kind of got me thinking this. It's from M. This is the comment she wrote. Sex is one of those things that can be good or bad. Sex positive is great, but sometimes it leaves out the fact that sex can be damaging. So, you know, I was inspired to ask the question largely in those terms because actually, and Rebecca has a comment right there above it about it, sex as a means of communication, you know. It's an interpersonal relation. It's the most personal relation. Can you hurt through sex? Can you harm? Can you be harmed? You know. Can you disrespect yourself? Can you disrespect others? In a weird way, I'm going to make this submission. In a weird way, it is perfectly natural that religion would weigh in on this aspect of our lives. It is problematic in the way that it has, you know, unfortunately, because I'm going to borrow a word that Finn mentioned, taboo, right? For so long, sex is taboo. And I don't know what that's all about. I don't know why that is. Eagleton makes the point that, you know, Jesus never weighs in on sex, and it's true. That doesn't come up once. In fact, quite to the opposite, he is he's forgiving, right? He talks about being forgiving towards a prostitute. And he talks to the Samaritan lady who was, I think, promiscuous, you know. I don't know that it's about him staying in his lane. That's a very modern way of thinking things. But I think it's his view that how do we get caught up in these other issues that eclipse social justice? You know, why? By the way, I would also think that there's a way, yeah, and he, in some ways, he absolutely didn't stay in his lane when he threw over the tables at the temple. He didn't. But there are also ways of thinking that, you know, sexual life and sexual mores are a very important ethical issue, you know. Anyway, a little bit of a sticky topic. Anyway, anybody else want to chime in? Questions, comments? All right. That was interesting. I don't often talk about sex with Micah students. It's probably a prudent choice, but it's always interesting when we have this conversation. I always like to hear what you all have to say. But let's make another because Micah is horny. Okay. If you say so. I don't go in your dorms. I don't know. I do have a story. It's rated G, don't worry. So, you know, our Gateway building has those big glass studios facing the 83, right? You know that? You know, that part of so part of the Gateway faces Mount Royal, but the back part facing the 83 is all these studios. And I was at Micah when they unveiled plans for this building, and our president at the time was Fred Lazarus. He says, we're going to put up these studios, and when people drive down the 83 at night, they'll be able to see what our students are making and what they're doing. And I'm like, Fred, there's gonna be a lot of drugs and sex. I'm not sure you want, not sure you want to show them what's going on in the Micah studios. I don't know what kids do in their studios. I haven't heard of any scandals though. Yeah, I didn't think I was wrong, but anyway. Okay, now it's time for another 180-degree turn. You ready? Now we're going to talk about faith and science. Okay, or better yet, faith of science. Because one of the interesting arguments that Eagleton raises here is, one of his critiques of Ditchkins is Ditchkins likes to say that faith and science are absolutely opposed. But science has a great deal of faith involved as well. And this is something that Dawkins ignores. This is around page 127, this comes up. He has a quote here: "The faculty of reason does not go all the way down." Page 127. We know what that means. The faculty of reason does not go all the way down. Go for it, Sonny.
It does have like multiple meanings, but one of the meanings is that reason can't argue that reason is the best authority. It can't build itself on its own.
Okay. Good. 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 Oh, Zach, yes.
Yeah, this might not be the case, but I'm thinking it also means like, reason cannot, I mean, I do remember this was one thing that was mentioned in the reading, that like reason cannot give us all of the knowledge that we have. Like, for example, in scientific terms, like a lot of the things that we know to be true through scientific specialists are not necessarily something that reason would tell us, like specifically in terms of like particle physics or like nuclear physics and stuff like that. It's not necessarily always something that reason would tell you.
Good. Okay. I remember the passage you're referencing, sure. Anybody else? That's slightly a different point he's making, Zach. It's an awesome point, and I want to get there. It's more about, scientific discoveries and scientific theory are not as obviously rational as they seem. When he says that science, the fact that reason does not go all the way down, that's his way of saying that reason is situated on a foundation of faith. Most of our everyday lives, we operate by way of faith. Understood generally. We're not talking about religious faith, right? There's another quote from the philosopher Wittgenstein on page 130: "Acting precedes knowing." And what acting precedes knowing means is that, when we act, we're not self-consciously justifying everything we do. We operate on instinct. And instinct involves a lot of faith. In any case, here's another quote. This is on page 131. He says, "Science trades on articles of faith." Articles of faith. And one of those articles of faith, he says, is objectivity. What is objectivity? Lack of bias. That's awesome. Anybody else want to add to it? Okay, I will run with this then. How is objectivity an article of faith? How is objectivity an article of faith? There's more to the definition of objectivity, so we may have to flesh that out, but we might as well start here. How is objectivity an article of faith? Nobody's got anything? All right, then I'll have to press this a little further, y'all. What the heck is scientific objectivity? What is scientific objectivity? What does objectivity in the realm of science mean? What does it look like? What does objectivity in the realm of science look like? Rebecca?
I mean, the way that I understand it is like it's giving me very much facts don't care about your feelings. Like,
Yeah.
you know, it's this supposedly unbiased search of like truth, trying to find how things work the way that they do, and like trying to remove all like personal bias out of it, so
Good.
that objective, so that it's like not, you know, there's no like human influence. But when you look at science, I think the reason that like Eagleton talks about this a lot is, you know, a lot of things that we once thought were objectively true, we figured out actually weren't. So it's, you know, there is some level of faith in the people telling you the information. Like, you know, I think you said something like when you are citing something, you do have some level of faith in the person that wrote the article or made the study, because you're trusting that, you know, whatever they said was true.
Right.
Where there is a possibility that it wasn't. So like you're exerting some level of faith in whatever that is.
Good. Yeah. Yeah, to see things objectively, when we talk about that in terms of science, it means to see things as they really are, like independent of perspective. And then, of course, independent of free of our value judgments, right? And I'm going to give you a little story. Well, I mean, let me flesh this out a little more. I mean, you know, it is the presumption that this is what science will deliver to us, right? No, I think it's probably time for a story. You know, so you guys know Jane Goodall. I think that's how you spell her name. You guys know Jane Goodall? She went and studied the gorillas in I think it was in Rwanda or the Congo in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. And she went out to the gorilla colony, and this is just a very rough sketch of what she did. But she, you know, when she first studies them, they're very cognizant of her presence. So they're doing things like showing off or whatever. And she's like, you know, well, I'm going to just chill out and become unobtrusive, because as they get used to me, then I'll start to see them objectively, right? I'll see them as they are, as they truly are, right? And so she sits there behind a tree for I don't know how long, weeks, months, quietly, until they're very, you know, used to her and they ignore her. And then finally she says, you know, well, now I can see how these gorillas are behaving in and of themselves, right? That kind of objectivity, Eagleton wants us to know, is an article of faith. How so? Might Jane Goodall be wrong that she is seeing objective gorilla behavior? You feel what I'm saying? How did she know? Zach?
I mean, she's basing it on what she knows about like human behavior and basically making the assumption that because we're so genetically close, that their behavior mirrors ours in some way. And she's just kind of basing that off of what she knows about, human biology and, monkey biology, basically. So it's in that way, it's not necessarily anything that's proven. It's just something that she has faith in that does make sense, which is why other people have faith in it.
Good. Thank you. Sunny says, we don't have any guarantees that are presumed unobtrusively led to the chimps acting naturally. For all we know, they could have changed completely because of her entrance. Well, think about any animal biologist, right? My best friend, his sister, she specializes in slugs. That's her thing, slugs. Can you imagine spending all your day studying slugs? And she believes she is getting down to the nuts and bolts of real slug behavior. She knows how slugs operate in and of, in themselves. Of course, I don't know that slugs behave any differently when humans are around. How do slugs behave when humans are not around? Trick question. We have no fucking idea. Did you know they dance? When we're not around, they dance and they make love. Probably, I'm just guessing. Seriously though, this is the point about, yeah, but well, she seems to be doing well and she's happy. But here's the point, like objectivity is a faith-bound notion. It's the notion that we are seeing things as they are in themselves apart from human perspective. Guess what? We can never see anything apart from human perspective. Why? Because we're fucking human. Right? We never get to see. So the point about Jane Goodall is, why is she justified at a certain point in saying, aha, now they are no longer, primping for the camera. Now this is real, honest guerrilla behavior. It's a presumption. But in that sense, all claims to scientific objectivity are always a presumption, right? Because we always see things from our perspective. One American philosopher, Thomas Nagel, he calls objectivity, he calls it the view from nowhere. And I always like that term. That kind of sums it up well, right? Subjectivity is the rule, is the view from somewhere, right? Your subjective impression of something that's influenced and bound by your values. And objectivity and opinions, and objectivity is the attempt to transcend that. How do you know that you ever transcend that? You can't know that. Objectivity may just be a perspective under a different word. Okay. Going back a few pages, he points out that, we operate in faith in a lot of different aspects of our life. So one of his key arguments is that science is faith is a key part of how science operates. It's built into scientific presumptions, but, it is, there's faith in a lot of different aspects of our lives as well. This quote on page 115 at the bottom, he says, nobody has ever clapped eyes on the unconscious, yet many people believe in its existence on the grounds that it makes excellent sense of their experience in the world. Moreover, a great deal of what we believe we do not know firsthand. Instead, we have faith in the knowledge of specialists. It is also true that plenty of people believe in things that do not exist, such as a wholly just society. The ideals that guide us, those are something we have faith in too. Oh my God, you guys are still on about the slugs. Here I was getting all serious and... Oh yes, M, that is a good point. Right. There's faith in so many different aspects of our life that we just ignore all the time, He goes on to say on page 116, he says, religions, that while religious claims require some evidence from faith, faith is not prompted by evidence alone. There's so much more to faith than just this was how he started out chapter 3. He was talking about how believing in God is not like believing in the Yeti. The Yeti, by the Yeti, I don't mean a brand of coolers. I mean, the Yeti is what? Yeti is the, is that the abominable snowman? Am I right? Yeah. White Bigfoot. Okay, if you say so. Yeah, believing in God is not like believing in the Yeti. Right. Dawkins proposes we can't believe in the Yeti because we don't have any empirical evidence of it. Bring me a hair, bring me a footprint, bring me a photo, right? But Eagleton says, this is misunderstanding something profoundly about the nature of religious belief. Religious belief does not just hinge on evidence, right? It is infused and informed. It's actually motivated and mobilized by values. It's mobilized by belief in ideals. And then the evidence just comes later, right? So one of the recurring themes in the gospel, for example, is that Jesus is always arguing with the Pharisees. And the Pharisees were the Jewish religious leaders who were very insistent on abiding by the laws of Leviticus, which are much more than just kosher laws of diet. They have pertain to how you live your life, how you work, what you wear, things like that. And Jesus, the general argument is Jesus says to the Pharisees, instead of focusing on the letter of the law, focus on the spirit of the law, right? He says, you guys are wrapped up in all these little details of how you should eat and how you should live, but how do you treat the poor, right? That's more important. So he calls them hypocrites. But the discussion gets a little bit heated when actually Jesus gets angry when the Pharisees say to him, you need to perform some miracles for me, for us. Perform some miracles for us. Prove to us who you are. We've been hearing about these miracles. You gave someone sight. You cured someone's disease. So show us what these are. And Jesus refuses to perform any miracles for the Pharisees. And people have often wondered why that is. Eagleton gives us some kind of an answer. He suggests that the reason that he doesn't perform miracles is because the empirical evidence is secondary. You will see the miracles when you believe. right? When you believe, when you show that you're open to the religious ideals, to the religious goals, then you will believe. The evidence on its own is never going to be enough. I think, let's see, around page 112, he makes this point. Yeah, middle of the page, he says, this is, only a few pages in chapter 3. Faith, as the author of the Epistle to the Hebrews observes, is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things unseen. The virtue of hope for Christianity equally involves a kind of certainty. It is a matter of an assured trust, not of keeping one's fingers crossed. Whatever else may divide science and religion, it's not for the theologian the issue of certainty. The certainty appropriate to faith is not, to be sure, of the same kind as that of a scientific observation. Yeah. He goes on page 116 to explain what he means here. But he basically says that, faith requires a particular way of seeing the evidence. Faith involves a particular way of seeing the evidence. It's not just seeing the evidence alone in itself. It's a particular way of seeing the evidence. And he says such seeing is informed and influenced by being part of a believing community, like a church or a synagogue or a mosque. There's another beautiful quote here on page 119. He says at the bottom, it is just that faith cannot be reduced to the endorsement of certain propositions which cannot be proved. What moves people to have faith in, say, the possibility of a non-racist society is a set of commitments, not in the first place a set of propositions. They must already have some allegiance to an idea of justice and to the possibility of its realization. If they are to be stirred to action by the knowledge that men and women are being refused employment because of their skin color, the knowledge in itself is not enough to do it. And then he quotes Kierkegaard, a believer, after all, is someone in love. A believer is someone in love. You guys know what that means? Okay, Rebecca, I don't know what you're doing here. Chris.
Is it kind of like when they say like someone is in love and they have like rose-colored lenses? So then it's like, you can't really look at like what they're doing like for the true thing that it is, but like with your own like little warped perception of it.
Yeah. Well, when you're in love, I think it's a way of how you see behavior, right? Maybe the person you love, has a really annoying way of grinding her teeth or something, I don't know. But then when you're in love, I used to date a girl once and she had this really annoying habit of like, this is going to sound so weird, like cracking her neck. And then after I started dating her, I kind of saw it as endearing. And then we had a fight and broke up and it was no longer endearing. Well, I don't know. I'm trying to think. I'm grappling with this quote here on page 120. I'm not exactly sure. Well, he goes on to explain it a few lines down. He says on page 120, because you already take a passionate interest in women's liberation, you can come to understand the workings of patriarchy better. When you have passionate understanding in an ideal, then you can read the facts better. Otherwise, you might not bother. All reasoning is conducted within the ambit of some sort of faith, attraction, inclination, orientation, predisposition, or prior commitment. Right. So I guess this is his way of arguing that, like, I mean, I think I know what he's saying now. And I'll put it this way. Why? And I'm going to talk from, I'm going to talk from the vantage point of Christianity, because that's the vantage point he talks about, and that's the experience I can speak to. But feel free to expound in your own experience. Why 2,000 years ago did Christianity suddenly take off? Why did it appeal? Well, Dawkins would like you to think that it appealed because people believed the proposition of a God was likely. But I don't think that's the case. I think Christianity took off because of its socio-political message. And at the time, its socio-political message was very powerful. And the socio-political message is the one captured in the Beatitudes, which we discussed briefly, right? Blessed are the meek, blessed are the weak, blessed are the poor, blessed are the law of the peacemakers, et cetera, et cetera. It was a kind of religion that, in its origins and for a time, elevated the poor, right? And it, I often talk about this in my Greek philosophy classes. In the Greco-Roman world, happiness was the province of a few. Only a few could enjoy happiness. And life for the vast majority was immensely hard. Immensely hard, right? Something like 30% of the Roman population were slaves. So their life was hard. And then for the rest, life was hard. If you're a woman, life was hard. Suddenly along comes this Christian message, which says, you don't need to be rich and you don't need to be smart to be saved. You just need to be charitable. And no one had ever heard something like that before. And what was your reward? Eternal salvation. Okay. Now we might scoff today at the notion of heaven. Okay. And indeed, I discussed this in classes before. I don't know if I've discussed with you guys much, but the idea of what we talked about heaven, about whether it's a very important or motivational idea. I think for many people today, it's not. But in the pre-modern world, it must have been so powerful because life was hard. Think about the world that we lived in before modern medicine, It would suck. Oh, it's much worse than the Wendy's Big Bag, Chris. I'm thinking of, didn't I tell you all I had a kidney stone? I'm thinking of like kidney stones before pain medication. Childbirth before pain medication. Think about it, 100 years ago. Maternal fatality rates were huge. Half your children died by the age of 5. It was brutal. Life was suffering, right? You know what the Christian saying is? Bear your cross. Nowadays, that kind of saying has gone out because we're like, I don't got to bear my cross anymore. I'm going to pop an Advil, right? And take a hot bath, and I don't need to bear my cross anymore, But in the old days, I think that was a very powerful statement. Because you didn't have much, life was difficult and painful. We just died. Just imagine the kind of suffering that we had to grow accustomed to prior. My mother grew up in the west of Ireland. Her stories of dental care before, painkiller, Shoot me now. That's the tip of the iceberg, you know. Any case, the point I'm making is when St. Paul comes around preaching the message of Jesus, people weren't like, show me the evidence that this dude existed and prove to me the existence of this God you're talking about. People were captivated by the message. They were captivated by the early Christianity was a very democratic message. Everyone will be saved, and you'll be saved by being charitable, by helping. Okay. The chat is going off, has a life of its own again. Here I was all trying to get all serious. Anyway, anybody have any questions or comments? I'm going to call your attention to one quote from last week I thought was really cool, but we didn't get to. This is the very end of chapter 1. He says in the middle of 45, he says, it is unlikely that words like grace or fallenness or redemption can exert much force in a social order where even words like emancipation are greeted with bemused silence. Emancipation for what exactly? Isn't that just 260s to be true? How could there be a transformed future in a culture for which, as one postmodern thinker excitedly remarked, the future will be the present only with more options? One of his complaints is that we have been stripped, or we are unable to entertain these bold ideals anymore. Those who were gripped by Christianity in the early days, they were gripped by the ideals. They were gripped by the vision of society that Paul was invoking. And this leads to the larger argument for Eagleton that, you know, this kind of religious language is kind of lost on us because, you know, our society has been impoverished. And it's largely, this is where he shows his true political colors, it's largely the problem of capitalism. In the end of the day, capitalism is fatally individualistic. Capitalism, or some of y'all might know better, neoliberalism, capitalism undermines the language of community. This is actually one of the reasons he thinks Dawkins doesn't understand the Bible or religion, period, because religion is communal based. Religion is necessarily communal, but modern society is highly individualistic, at least in the modern West. And capitalism is happily exporting that individualism all over the world. And so long as we are growing more and more individualistic, the ideals, you know, of the gospel, for example, are lost on us. And which, by the way, are the ideals of socialism, he points out, right? Let me pause there for a second, see if anybody has any comments or questions. Rebecca?
Yeah, I'm kind of writing about this in my paper, spoiler alert, but something I was thinking about when I was like kind of going back through what he was writing, he mentioned something about like how he thinks that right now we're more like, we used to view kind of conflicting ideas as like civilization and barbarism, and that it's changed to civilization and culture. And I think something that's happened to the US specifically, and probably in other countries, but like capitalism has kind of become more than just an economic system here. Like it is a culture now, which makes it even harder to get rid of.
Yes.
Because people literally have been so brainwashed by it that they think that there's literally no other way, and they're terrified of the word socialism, and they throw it at everything they hate. And it's just like a really weird thing to have happened, and that ironically there are so many Christians in America that are like staunch capitalists. It doesn't make sense to me. So it's just something I was thinking about.
Well, I would put it this way. I'm putting this in the chat. We don't know how to think in terms of the common. We don't know how to think in terms of community. And I think this is something that transcends, Christianity in this country, the Christians. I was writing about this in another piece I'm working on elsewhere, but look at the lived environment of the American landscape. Look at suburbia. Suburbia is devoted to the individual pod, right? You live in your individual, it's not geared towards community. You all are designers, think about what a neighborhood would look like if it were geared towards community. It would not look like the suburban cul-de-sac. Most suburban neighborhoods, many suburban neighborhoods don't have sidewalks, for Christ's sake, right? They don't have common areas. They don't have parks. All socializing is steered towards the backyard, which is fenced in, That affirms, that is an expression of and an affirmation of our devotion to individualism. And how it fits with the spirit of capitalism is individualism and consumption go hand in hand, right? The shared economy is a problem. The shared economy means we won't be owning our own car, for example, right? When we share stuff, we consume less. And that's a problem. Finn.
You've been bringing up such interesting points. I kind of forgot what I was going to talk about, but I will say something I learned in anti-communism class, US history, is that, like, that sort of sense of capitalism that Rebecca was talking about, where it's like these Christians are like staunch capitalists, and it makes no sense considering like what tenets are preached in Christianity. Yeah. It's the same idea of what we were talking about with like sex. Like it's the same idea. It's all about that power structure and hierarchy based like authoritative leadership.
Yes.
Because I think it's kind of, at least how I rationalize it in my head, I'm sure there's plenty more better theories on it, but it's like, there's something so American about that, considering the foundations of like the colonial development. And that's keeping this like weird hierarchy that has been present like ever since, genocide day one, you know what I mean? And it's like, and I just think it's really interesting how it bleeds into like every issue that like we can think of. Like
how what does, I'm sorry, how what bleeds into?
That like Christianity specifically, and then that power dynamic.
Yeah.
And Christianity is more used as like a tool to sort of justify it, obviously, like we've seen, but like that same power dynamic that comes from like people policing sexuality and people promoting capitalism and conservatism, because that just makes no damn sense to me. Why would you not want change? I know, I don't get it, but like,
well, yeah. Capitalism makes it, I think Eagleton would say that capitalism makes it easy to suffer to deal with the, tolerate the suffering of others, right? Yeah. Because for two reasons. On the one hand, you need to focus on your own good.
Yes.
And two, Adam Smith tells us, specifically in Wealth of Nations, that you benefit the whole the more you spend and the more money you make. That's called trickle down, right?
Yeah, and that's like a thing like where just like, it's not necessarily American. Like this is like very European too. I know that like, I've been to other places and they have different cultural respect to it, but here it's like you have to ignore the homeless.
Yes.
It's like too painful to fully engage them. because of the helplessness you have. Capitalism promotes you not like, you can't trust everyone. You can't let them into your home. You can't give them shelter. You can't give them enough money because you need your money to pay rent, or you need your money to eat food. Things like that. And in other places I've been to, it's this culture that's like, no, that you can invite people in, or you can like treat them differently. And it's just so interesting to like meet that. Oh, and then, sorry, I'm so sorry, I've been talking forever. The one thing I thought of was there was this TikTok going around, and it was this guy being like, he was saying like that he was doing a job in like somewhere like Switzerland or the Czech Republic or something. And they were talking about days off, like sick days. And he's like, how many sick days do we have? And his coworker who was like from there was like, what are you talking about? And he's like, I mean, how many sick days do we get? And she's like, what? Like, you mean days that you're sick that you need to take off because you're sick? And he's like, wait, what? And so, I mean, it's just things like that that we just don't even think about.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of the more interesting debates that I've noticed recently is there are some, some people in this country who are, so it's about the politics of the vaccination. There are some people claiming that undocumented aliens, undocumented immigrants should not get the vaccine. What's the counter argument?
Yeah, I hate it here too.
Someone articulate the counter argument.
Well, the counter argument I think is if I'm a conservative mind, right? Hear me out. I'm one of the great conservative thinkers of our generation. How about if more people are vaccinated, the disease spreads less? Yeah. That's how I'd think of it. If you show up to get a shot, you should get one, because one person getting vaccinated could protect another person.
Very good. Rebecca.
I have 2 points to make. One, a lot of the people who probably think that undocumented immigrants should not get the vaccine probably don't want it themselves. So why don't you donate your vaccine to them and be quiet?
Okay.
Also, undocumented immigrants are famously exploited by giant corporations that want to put them, right next to each other in closed spaces, or out on farms. So maybe if they're going to have to be paid slave wages anyways and be exploited to uphold like most of our means of production in this country, they should at the very least get to be protected from a disease.
Yeah, thank you. We dealt with this argument back during Obamacare when it was rolled out 10 years ago. There were many Republicans who said that healthcare should not be extended to undocumented immigrants, and Obama had to accede to their demand in order to have the bill passed. But it didn't really make much sense at the time, because you don't want pockets of people in your society that have certain health problems that could spread. At the time, I remember the example we were talking about was tuberculosis. There were, among the immigrant population in Baltimore City, there were rising rates of tuberculosis. And I was saying at the time, do we really want that to spread? The reason I raised this example is because it kind of, let me see. Well, I'll make my point and then Finn can tack on. Is that okay, Finn?
Oh yeah, please.
So it kind of highlights what we're talking about here is it's the absolute it's ignoring the fact of community. It's ignoring the fact of community. These people, whatever they are, I don't care if they're illegal immigrants. I don't care if they're French. I don't care what, black, white, whatever. They are human beings, and they share the same air as me. Their health and welfare is not independent of mine. It doesn't. It's not independent. It's a fact of my life too. And it can impact me. The idea that I am untouched by them is a fallacy, And if I am untouched by their plight emotionally, then Jesus cries. There's a quote for you, so how can you not be moved by the plight of the homeless that are ever present, all right, Finn, you're up.
I was gonna say, like, that behavior is sort of just like the perfect, like, basically the behavior I'm talking about is like when like Obama was pressured into not giving undocumented immigrants the like care that they need because of ignorance. That ignorance is like the biggest reflection of like the mindset of capitalism, and people who, even if they're not necessarily bad people, are capitalists.
Yeah.
Right, who see the world like that. And I think it's just like that lack of thinking and that lack of understanding that leads to that same feeling that it's like, I have to ignore the homeless person because I have a home, I have the right, it's like, and I don't want to lose that. And it's just it's so fend for yourself that it's like blind to reason.
Well, do you guys still do we all still read Ayn Rand? I think didn't I bring that up in class?
Ooh.
Ayn Rand. I put the name in the chat. The Fountainhead. Yeah. I mean, Ayn Rand's thinking, the influence is so expansive and so pernicious. And her if you read her, it's quite shocking. Her view is basically that, it's not that she wants us to ignore the homeless, because her point is there must be losers in society. If there are not losers, then the rest of us don't have this impetus to excel, this impetus to work hard and to rise. It's a very cruel worldview. It's very cruel. And there are a lot of, I've written about this, there are a lot of notable politicians in this country who were deeply influenced by her thinking, and it's quite chilling, really. But let me tie this together here so we can take off. Essentially what Eagleton is doing here, he starts out by saying, Dawkins doesn't understand. He doesn't understand religion. He doesn't understand Christianity in particular. He doesn't understand what it is that makes people believe. He doesn't understand what motivates faith. Besides the fact, he doesn't even recognize the faith that is at the heart of science. Science is hardly so rational as it lets on. He has a great quote. I think Zach was referencing this. He has a great quote where he says, it doesn't sound very rational when it tells us that, when particle physicists tell us that a particle can pass through the same opening at, two different openings at the same time. I think that's the Heisenberg principle. It is effed up. I forget what page that's on. Much easier example I like to give is this. Science thinks it's eminently rational, okay? Well, we all know now that the Earth is rotating, right? But before the modern era, they thought the Earth was stationary, right? Kind of makes sense. If you're standing here on the planet and you're watching the sky go over you, you don't feel like you're moving, right? We know we are, but we don't feel like we're moving. But what's rational? Doesn't it seem rational to think, oh, yes, the universe is operating over my head. Yeah, the universe is moving around me. And then we find out later, oh, no, you're moving. So science is full of surprises that at first don't seem terribly rational in the slightest. But the other point, so, on one hand, he argues Dawkins misinterprets Christianity, but the broader problem is that he's worried that the rest of us, whether everybody else understands the real meaning and power of religion, because we may be fatally individualistic. He doesn't say this so much, but the Christian gospel is a major inspiration for socialism, right? A lot of Marx doesn't say Jesus said blah, blah, but the ideals are very much in sync. right? And what he says towards the end of your reading is that, religion can provide be a significant source of inspiration to mobilize political change. The problem is we're hopelessly individualistic now, right? And neoliberalism steadily attacks and undermines any potential for community. And to really feel, the mobilizing charge of Christianity and the mobilizing charge of socialism, for that matter, we need to transcend. We need to escape that kind of individualism. Any case, I think I'm going to stop there because I have brain damage. I'm a little fried now, so I'm going to leave it. We can pick it up there next week. Anybody have any last questions or comments before we break?
Hi, Furman.
Okay, hi.
Hi. That's it. Hi.
Okay. All right. Well, then I guess we're all done. Thank you, Em. Next week, I'll see you all. I feel fresh. Spring. I'll see you all next week. You don't have a reading assignment, right? Just have papers. Oh, I'll stick around now. If anybody wants to chat about the papers, I'll stick around. I'll also stick around after class next week. If anybody wants to talk about their papers, feel free to make appointments with me at any time. Okay. Your papers due next week. We'll meet for a discussion. It'll be informal, won't take long, and that's about it. Okay, everybody? Have a wonderful week. Take care, everybody. See ya.
Thanks,
Bye,
Sherman.
everybody. Have a great week.
Bye.